Hi, this is Justin Ralston with Essexville-Hampton Public Schools, and welcome to Hey Bay City.
Justin Ralston, I'm so excited to talk to you as a former educator myself. I'm so excited. There's such a buzz around you and around you being here. I'm stoked that you're here in Hey Bay City.
I'm excited to be here, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, I did a little bit of stalking on your background, as I am apt to do. And you actually grew up in Indianapolis in one of the smallest public schools in the state. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I have to correct you.
Okay.
I grew up in Indiana.
Okay, Indiana.
About 3 hours north of Indianapolis.
Okay.
In a small town called Angola.
Oh.
And I went to Hamilton Community Schools, one of the smallest public schools in the state of Indiana. I graduated with, I believe, 36 in my class.
Wild. And it was like K through 12 all in the same building?
K to 12, all in the same building. And one of the distinct memories that I have was my kindergarten teacher attended graduation, because that's just what you do when you're all in the same building.
Wild. See, when I was teaching, I was in a little bit different situation too. I taught in a multi-grade classroom, very small school. When you think back on that experience, it's really easy to say, well, it's a very small school and it's, so much up against it. It's only 36. But looking back on it, what was the advantage of having such a really intimate educational situation?
Yeah, so I actually still remember my senior year writing a college, I think, scholarship application, and I was talking about the idea of colleges being opportunistic, just as what my school experience was. But by attending such a small school, I was able to really be able to get involved in things that I probably would not have been if I was at a larger school. So I was able to start our high school newspaper. I joined the track and cross-country teams, things that I probably wouldn't have done if I was in a bigger school.
I feel the same way, because I ended up at a relatively small high school, and I was able to play football. I was able to do musicals, school newspaper, things like that. You got to have your hands in a lot of different areas, where maybe if you're in a larger school, there might be a tendency to kind of pigeonhole yourself into a specific avenue. Yeah,
absolutely. But I think what I learned from the small school experience then propelled me to success that I had at Indiana University, which was a bit overwhelming to be able to walk into that campus after being in such a small community.
Yeah, I can imagine kind of a shell shock. Like, why are all these people here?
Right.
What was the thing that got you interested in pursuing a career in education?
Yeah, so I think I always knew that I wanted to be an educator. I remember as a small child writing math worksheets for my grandparents and having them complete them and do these simple addition problems. So I'd always been interested in going into education. And then I think once I realized and I had committed myself to going to college, there was really no turning back.
Ah, very cool. So where'd you go to college after high school?
So I went to Indiana University in Bloomington.
Okay, then how did you end up in D.C.?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. I was a 10-year 4-H member, very involved in Indiana 4-H. And actually, my first trip to D.C. was because of 4-H. And taught in Bloomington after I graduated and absolutely loved it. But then ended up and decided I wanted to go back to D.C. I'd interned there as an undergrad. And there was only 2 schools in the country that had a specialization in a master's program that I was looking at, and D.C. was one of those places. So that was one of the big reasons why I chose D.C.
What was the master's program you were looking at?
So I got a master's in clinical social work with a concentration in refugees and displaced populations.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a powerful program at Howard University, and I think really helped sort of transform my picture of the world and really picture of education when I walked back into education after getting the degree.
Well, what was the pull to social work with a concentration in what you concentrated at?
Yeah, so I remember very distinctly studying social studies education and really being interested in ideas of social justice, of inequality issues. And then what I found as a teacher, even though I had a great program, was that the students that I often wanted to be able to reach the most, the students that maybe weren't attending class, the students who were failing, those were the students that I was really committed to being able to figure out how to engage, and I struggled. And so I had also done my student teaching at IU in Kenya, in rural Kenya, and fell in love with East Africa and that whole experience, and then realized, looking at disenfranchised populations, looking at both displaced and refugees, is there's a lot of power to be learned from the experience and work that needs to be done.
wild. I'm just so fascinated by that. I had a stint out at Princeton at Westminster Choir College at their Center for Community Engagement and Critical Pedagogy. So I'm so fascinated by people within the education system that have, I don't want to say like unexpected interests or something that brings a certain perspective to education. It's something more, and obviously no offense to teachers that are like, I am a kindergarten teacher. My wife is one and she's great at it. But people that I spent time in Kenya and I'm very passionate about this. It's just that additional perspective is just so fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that it made me an absolute better teacher. It's made me a better leader. But being able to walk back into the classroom. So I ended up and decided after completing the degree to go back into teaching with this like sort of newfound toolkit. And so I worked in a community just maybe 2 miles outside of Washington, D.C. with a large immigrant population. And I taught high school special ed. And to be able to pull all of the different pieces that I learned between the School of Education at IU and the social work degree program at Howard, it was really a strong combination.
I had a short stint in a special education classroom right at the beginning of my career, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I was super intimidated. I had no experience really in a special education classroom, and those kids just cracked my brain wide open, cracked my heart wide open. I was with them for only a few weeks, but it was just really, really incredible. What was your experience like?
Yeah, very similar. So I had gone to school to be a social studies teacher, like I had said. And then this was back when the economy was really challenging in the late 2000s. And so it turned out that there was a hiring freeze on social studies teachers in much of the DC area. And so I had met this school at a hiring fair, and the principal was like, I got to have you. But the only way I can bring you in is a special ed for a year. And then I can move you to teach AP government, whatever it is that you want. And so I took her up on that. And within the first or second day of teaching, I'm like, oh no, this is where I belong. And so she held true to her word and asked me about moving to Gen Ed the following year in that spring. And I was like, nope, I'm actually committed to doing special ed work. And so continue to do that.
I mean, on the surface, it sounds like something completely unrelated. You want a social studies teacher, but then you think about your social work experience and specifically your passion for underrepresented, disadvantaged populations, and special education, absolutely one of those.
Absolutely. And that's where, and I have shared this with teachers and schools that I've worked with ever since, but that's really where I've developed the mantra, which isn't mine, but I've adopted it, is that if students don't learn the way that we teach, we got to teach the way that they learn. And that has been such a powerful shift in mindset around seeing like the potential and the strengths that students with disabilities actually have.
So you taught in DC for 15 years, is that correct?
So I was there for 15 years. So there was the 2 years of grad school, and then I ended up and taught special ed at a high school, became a special education co-coordinator at that high school, and then had the opportunity to get an assistant principal position at a pre-K to 8 in Washington, D.C. And so did that for a couple of years, and then very quickly had the opportunity to become a principal of a pre-K to 8, and then got abruptly transferred, as sometimes happens in education, to take over a high school in D.C., and then served as principal there for the last 4 years.
Interesting. What was the draw to make the jump from being in the classroom as a teacher to being in administration as a vice principal, then a principal?
Yeah, so I think that's where the social work piece was really powerful, but really taking like a systems approach and like looking at different systems that impact both positively and negatively education. And really, I think working in special ed lit a fire under me to be able to see a lot of the inequalities and the injustices, quite frankly, that are happening in special ed. And so I wanted to be a change factor. And then so what I found is each position that I moved up in, I was able to work on creating change, but then also found limits to that change because of a system or structure that existed beyond where I was.
I'm so intrigued by this conversation because I was out at Princeton, seems like a decade ago, and I have never gotten to talk to anybody, any other human on this planet about like constructs within the classroom. And that was 1000% the thing. Adopting this critical pedagogical approach was it's more than just we're going to teach you this subject, and we're going to try to teach you this subject the best that we can, because that teaching exists within a context and within an environment. And to ignore that environment, you end up with injustices. You end up with systems that don't work. You end up with kids getting missed out or not being acknowledged or things like that. Not because people are evil, but just because you build this really complicated ship. And critical pedagogy was a great way to deconstruct that and say, well, what are the other influences that affect kids and their lives and learning, and how can we teach so that they can learn, and how can we really understand the world of education that we're trying to operate in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people in education have had similar backgrounds as me. Like, I really enjoyed school. I really enjoyed my time at Hamilton Community Schools. And unfortunately, a lot of people who may not have had good experiences, those are not the people that are wanting to come back into classrooms. But it's important to be able to get that perspective, because it's like, well, why aren't you interested in working in the newspaper? Why aren't you interested in getting involved in this club? Because I did. But there's a whole nother sort of realm to understanding what students' experiences are that are different than what my own are.
Yeah, and then you just add at the administration level, you have this ability to really influence at a large scale so many kids, because you can look at things and say, well, if we do this better, if we pursue this avenue of education, if we lift this or do this or make this approach, you're not only affecting the 27 kids in your classroom, but it could be 2,700 or 3,000 or 30,000 kids over a career.
Yep, and I think the other piece that's critical to that piece, and that I've really enjoyed about administration, is this idea of family engagement. Again, I think I have the bias because of my social work experience and sort of what I was able to learn through the program. But I've really taken the family engagement piece as a critical component of my leadership and sort of view of public education in order to be able to advance this to the next level.
We're going to dive into that in a second. But first, tell me about when you started thinking about moving westward.
Yeah, so the pandemic was challenging for everybody in different ways. And I think one of the things that I really learned over the past 3 years was the value of family. I experienced, as so many people did, some unexpected loss during COVID with some of my closest and sort of my mentor, a cousin who passed away. And so I realized, you know what, like maybe I should rethink and sort of push myself to maybe get back to be closer with family and to be able to continue the work. But maybe I need to shift myself to be able to sort of reignite my energy and desire to impact change in education. And Michigan was really at the top of the list because I grew up right like 10 miles south of the border in Indiana. And my parents spent a lot of time vacationing here. My parents have a cabin in northern Michigan. And so I love the outdoors. And so for a lot of reasons, it just like this was getting back closer to home in a state that I've always really been fond of.
How'd your interview go at Essexville? Did you crush it?
Oh, I thought the interview went okay. I did not walk out of there, though, thinking that I crushed it.
You were feeling a little nervous?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Plus, I had never been. Even though I spent a lot of time in Michigan, I had never been to this part of Michigan. So my first time in Essexville, first time in Bay City, was pulling up for the interview back on a hot July day.
Yeah.
But no, I thought that it went okay.
Okay.
And then I was quite shocked. I think was it maybe a week or just under a week later when I got a phone call with, I think, the entire board on speakerphone, and it was not the phone call I was expecting.
Well, I'm glad that we caught you off guard, because like I said at the beginning, people just super excited about you and being here, and all the folks that I've met, you just like, oh, you got to talk to Justin. You got to talk to Justin. And one of the things I ran across was somebody, and I don't want to put the pressure on you too much, but somebody had referred to you as the transformative leader that we were looking for. So,
I mean, that's an incredibly powerful statement, and I think really the success of the work is really dependent upon the community in which I am so privileged to be a part of. And I was determined to be able to find a house. The housing market is very challenging here. I quickly learned. It's also challenging in DC, but I'm super fortunate to be able to have found a house that's walking distance to Garber, so that I'm really part of the community. I've never not lived in a community that I've served. And so I really think that the successes that we've had or that we will have is really dependent on our collective effort as a community. So I'm very fortunate to be here.
That's something that I really want to dive into is your philosophy towards leadership, because we've kind of hinted at it, and we're starting to get into it right now. In that, yes, you are a superintendent. Here you are steering this ship. But you immediately redirected that comment to, yeah, but it's us. Yes, but it's our community. And one of the things that I'm interested in talking to you about is that you did 100-day listening tour. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So again, I was very clear that I don't know the community, and I remember one of the teacher asked me. I think it was a teacher asked me on my first day of meeting the staff, what initiatives is it that you want to bring? And like that's the classic concern, fear, anxiety that a teacher or anybody in the school system has.
So what exactly are you going to do?
Exactly. What are we going to have to do now?
Yeah, right.
And so my response to that, and of course the question I wasn't really prepared for. I was just sort of taking questions of popcorn from the audience, but I don't have one. But then I'm like, wait, I hope the Board of Education doesn't regret their decision to make me an offer. But really, my ideas and initiatives are going to be generated based on what I learn about the community. And so it is critical for me to really integrate myself as best that I can in the community, understand what's working well, which there's so much that is, and then to look at what opportunities exist. And so even some of the big pieces that we're already sort of working on already in my 5 months there are pieces that were already existing within the community that I'm working to just elevate to be able to bring attention to.
It's such a smart way to go about it, such a human way to go about it, because it would be so easy to come in as this guy from the East Coast, from DC, like I'm going to come in and I'm going to inflict all of my great ideas on you. And not because it's a East Coast DC thing, but it's so easy for us to do that. We go into a situation that we don't know anything about, and we assume we know everything that there is to know. Everything from community work and how communities operate and things like that, how a consultant comes in or a city planner comes in. You really got to take the time to get to know the community, talk to people, understand it, and then make your plan from there. It'd make me incredibly nervous if you came in from a community that you don't know anything about saying, yeah, I have a 17-step plan and here we go. And it's starting tomorrow. I mean, like you don't know. You don't know what you should do.
Yeah. And I think that's really been one of the things that sort of through the experience that I've had that has really taught me the value of listening to a community. I mean, imagine, and I spent a lot of time grappling with this, teaching social studies in a refugee camp that often has to do with civic education when you're in, and I was in Uganda at the time, but when you're trying to teach civic education to refugees living in Uganda who are from the Congo, from Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, Eritrea, etc., it's really challenging to be able to do. And in order to be able to best do that, you really got to figure out sort of where the commonalities are to be able to sort of weave this fine thread to be able to like make it effective for everyone.
Yeah, otherwise you end up being the social studies teacher in a refugee camp that's like, okay, kids, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, when that is not their lives. That is not what they need to know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was something else that you instituted, and correct me if my understanding's wrong, was a student superintendent cabinet.
Yeah, so I think this was one of the things that I very much hold near and dear to my heart, but I've always been about student voice as well. I think that's why, as a bit of a rebel in high school, I wanted to start my high school newspaper because I felt like students needed another opportunity to have their voices uplifted. And so this was also something that I know that was done in Washington, D.C., and I saw a lot of success with it. And so we ended up and put out applications to Kramer and Garber students that may be interested. My goal was to be able to get a cross-representation of the school. I wasn't necessarily looking for all of the students that are in every activity in a 4.0 GPA. And then I was very fortunate based on the applications we received, which we received a good amount, but we were able to accommodate all of them. So we didn't turn any student away. And so I meet with them once a month. In fact, this afternoon or in about 3 hours, I am meeting with Kramer students for our January conversation.
Oh, very cool. I love that, because another temptation we give into as adults is we assume that we know what kids need, or we assume that we know what kids want, and we forget in the mix that we are no longer kids, and that the world is very much different, and that they are also human too, and reaching into them and saying, hey, you need to tell us what you're thinking. We want to listen to what you have to say is not only the best human thing to do, but it's also enlightening to us because, oh, I never would have thought about it that way. Or it's just also providing them an opportunity to practice learning how to make their voices heard, which is just an unlimited life skill.
Yeah, and I looked at just an example of that. I had them complete a quick survey of topics that were of interest to them. So again, I didn't walk in with a plan. This is what we're doing for the next 6 months. But really, the plan will be developed based on what you all tell me you want to talk about. So if you want to talk about athletics, we can work on bringing the athletic director in here and have a conversation. And so the top two from one of the schools, the top two things that came out that students wanted to speak about were academics and social emotional needs of students.
Wow.
Which I thought was really powerful. So I'm excited to be able to dive into those conversations further.
As long as we're talking about leadership, we're talking about the importance of really engaging the community, getting everybody involved, things like that. Are there any other qualities of good leadership that you really hold as important?
So I think transparency is a word that's often overused, or at least I'm accustomed to it being overused. But we are a public institution. I just was in a meeting a couple of days ago, and then I reminded our team, like, we are a public institution and we have an obligation to the public with taxpayer dollars to be really transparent in what it is that we're doing, as well as having the need and responsibility to respond to what the pressing needs are. Whether or not it's meeting early childhood care needs in the district or looking at how our finances work, we have an obligation to ensure that is transparent and clear to the public. Now, of course, we may disagree at times where we allot resources, and that disagreement, I think, is valuable. But the idea of transparency, I think, is critical.
The magic word transparency is so easy to say, and like, okay, I checked my box. I said we're transparent, but what that means is potentially some conflict. It means everybody having to approach that conversation in a spirit of good faith and say we all want the best best for our kids, and if the school district is trying to be transparent, we have to be able to support them in that, and that it's a risky, scary value there, Justin Ralston.
Yeah, yes, it is. But the moment that we end up and don't have conflict, for example, the moment that we're probably not going to end up and be successful, and we're going to be satisfied with mediocrity. So the conflict is good as long as we know how to effectively engage with it and manage it.
Yeah, you can't expect to have hundreds and thousands of people all involved in something and have there not be disagreements.
Exactly. But it is vital, again, as a public institution who has the responsibility to serve the community and every community member within Essexville-Hampton Public Schools. I think we need that.
Yeah. So we have community engagement. We have transparency. Is there one more value of leadership?
Yeah. So the other piece that has often, and I've heard this a lot of in a lot of different places that I have been in, is this idea of communication. And how do we end up and sort of have a fluid communication channel that exists, where it's not just simply top down or one way, but how do we end up and ensure that there's actually dialogue and back and forth conversation? And that's been something that, as I'm learning the communication structures as well as sort of what is needed, is something that we've tried to lean into a lot as well. And I hope through the idea of this sort of two-way communication street, one of the core components of our strategic plan that we're working on is empowering our people. And I think the more that our people can be empowered to be able to argue and to be able to share what they believe is right, or this new idea or this new innovation, or to be doing something that we have been doing that is really working, that we don't want to lose sight of, is really important.
Yeah. Do you have anybody in your past or anybody that you've read or studied that has really been an influence on you in this leadership role?
So I remember writing, so I ended up in after my Howard program, I actually got my executive master's in leadership from Georgetown School of Business. And there was a program designed specifically for school leaders. And we had to write a paper on this topic. And I felt like it's sort of the cheap way out. But then when I started writing it, I realized it's actually really complicated, and then ended up and required like 30 pages. And I still didn't get to probably the real point. But one of the things that I've always found value in is to be able to look at everybody as someone that I can learn from. And so that I don't really have a particular person that I sort of look at as an idol. There's qualities and elements of everybody that I've met, people that I've seen in leadership that I want to be able to pull from, both strengths as well as things that I probably wouldn't want to do.
Right.
But continue to be reflective on that, I think, is really important.
Yeah. So something else I read as I was talking to you was really this strategic plan that you're going to be following. Kind of give me a 101 when people hear the strategic plan. What does that mean? What does that entail? What are the elements involved?
Yeah, so a roadmap to where it is that we're going. I think, again, one of the things that really drew me to the community is the rich history and like legacy of the Essexville school system. And so I think the work that we have now is sort of to rethink who we are. The community has changed from a lot of what I have heard from people, and it's sort of reestablishing what our identity is as a school system, and then ensuring that we have collective voices at the table to be able to design a roadmap to get us to the next 5 years. I think this no one is shying away from the fact that the last couple of years has been incredibly challenging in education, and particularly in public education. It has been so hard on teachers, so hard on parents and students and families alike. And so sort of re-engaging in a conversation like this, I think, is so critical, because things are going to get surfaced that probably I wouldn't have thought of at all. And so through my 100-day listening tour, I was able to identify the 4 components that I think are the basic structure of the plan, but really the how and the what we're going to accomplish those things, or what I'm looking forward to through this process of engaging the community.
Yeah. What are those 4 things?
Yep. So it's number 1, to ensure excellence in school. So that's really what it is that we're doing inside of the building to make sure that students are reaching their academic best. The second is to be able to educate the whole child. And that's really the social emotional component around making sure that we're meeting students' needs, that our high schoolers just elevated as one of their top things they wanted to be able to have a conversation with me about. Number 3 is empowering our people. Our students are great. We're only as good as the teachers and the support staff that are in front of them every single day. And so we got to make sure that we're taking care of our teachers and our support staff. And then number 4 goes back to this idea of effectively engaging our families and our community in this work and in this process.
So you have 4 super critical elements within education. What is it going to take to pull this off? I mean, you have this big, complicated ship with kids involved and families involved and educators and staff and administration. What is it going to take to pull this off?
So I think it's going to be important for people to feel comfortable to be able to share their voices, as well as some new ideas or different ideas that may not be sort of shared or accustomed to what we have been doing. But I think that'll be critical. So we have a series of 4 community engagement sessions from 6 to 8 o'clock for the next 4 Thursdays. They're going to happen at one of each of our schools, although the topics will be district-wide. It's not necessarily focused on any of the individual schools. And then there's also a survey that we have posted on our website for families that may not be able to go or just want to be able to really emphasize some points that they want to get across. And then I'll be engaging staff in a professional development day in February that we have to make sure that their voices are captured. And then over the next 2 days, when I'm meeting with the superintendent cabinet with students, we'll get their feedback as well.
Awesome. Oh, man, I'm so excited. So something else I'm super excited to hear about, the STEM Center. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I spent my entire career in education across Indiana, Maryland, and DC, and now Michigan. And I have never entered a STEM center until I came to Michigan.
Really?
And we have one of our teachers who is incredibly dedicated and passionate about STEM education and robotics. He asked if I would go with and take a tour of the Hemlock STEM Center. And so of course, I'll go. I'll check out anything. And I was completely blown away with what they have done in the Hemlock community and how transformative that is for students. And I remember very distinctly meeting a student, and this wasn't staged. The student was just there working. Mm-hmm. And so I had a conversation with him. He was really talking a lot about mechanical engineering. And I was like, well, your parents mechanical engineers, or sort of where did this idea come from? And he shared that like both of his parents didn't go to college and live in the community. And it very much resonated with my own experiences. I'm a first-generation college student as well. But this experience completely transformed and provided him a whole new avenue to be able to explore.
How cool. So tell me about how you're going to implement that here.
Yeah, so it's going to be challenging. I'm very clear. It's going to be challenging, but we were able to dedicate, and with the board's support and unanimous support, we were able to dedicate $200,000 of the sale of a cell phone tower on the property that happened prior to me coming. And so we dedicated that money to be able to sort of the launch fund for the STEM Center. And then we are looking for architects. We just received bids on Friday for some architectural firms to be able to sort of scope out the land. I have two requirements. Number one, that it's on the Garber Kramer property. And number two, that we don't take away any student practice facilities. Outside of that, I don't have a preference. And so really that'll be community engagement and conversation, as well as the feedback from the architect. And so we're looking forward to getting the designs rendered. And then the big piece is going to be working with the community and local businesses to be able to help do the fundraising effort to get us to construction phase. Specifically with Essexville Garber, it also seems like not only is STEM something important in just the broad environment of education, not only is it important here in Michigan, but it's also super important in Essexville Garber. I mean, you think about the robotics team that's always just crushing it over there. It seems like a really obvious and natural marriage to say, hey, this is something that we as a school district are really focused on and becoming very successful in. Let's continue rolling that ball. Yeah, and I think it just made sense. And really what the selling factor was, in addition to sort of speaking with a student at Hemlock and seeing the facility and hearing the stories of impact, is it was really our students that are involved. No matter when I go to Garber after school, if I walk through the library or walk through some of the classrooms that they are using for the robotics program, there are always students there that are involved, engaged in doing something. And so, I mean, the students were very clear and being my main motivating factor to be like, this just makes sense for the community.
How cool is this? How cool are you, Justin Ralston? When if somebody's watching this podcast or they're listening to it, and they're a member of the community and they have an idea or they want to reach out in some way, what would be a good way of getting a hold of you?
Sure. So you can either call the board office, the Jaffe board office, through the main Essexville line, or I always do my best to be able to respond to emails in a timely fashion at ralstonj@e-hps.net.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Justin. I wish you the best in this school year and the next 25 school years, 30 school, how long you plan on being involved. Love that you're here. Love that you're helping us out.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Cut.